You got it?
Mhm.
All right, good. All right, so all right, so that's what we're going to present today. I'm not going to be the main presenter. I'm just going to introduce things, right? So as you see this slide, that we have MOUs with all these different entities: Discovery Prep, Corona, NASA, Vaughn, Oscar Romero. All these are schools, and we also have LA Mission College. And so through these entities, we have persons that come to us, and then we find out that they have issues that point red flags for us if they already haven't been, that there may be some issues with not only with whatever they may be presenting with anxiety or depression or acting out issues, but also with some red flags that show that they may have beyond the spectrum, as we call it, right? And so that's usually how we come versus them sending us directly because they already know that this is an issue. We're not here to evaluate that per se, but we can help people be evaluated as we see the need. And so that's the point in terms of, but we do see persons periodically with this issue, and we help them and their families navigate it. Okay. So as you see, we've been available around since 2014 as not only treating people in multicultural, multilingual methods, but in order to maximize mental health services, right? And one of the underserved populations that we deal with, right, a subset of that is those persons with ASD. So we want to be sensitive to that, and that's the point of today's presentation. So as those with autism disorder, as I said, are another subset of persons who have problems with or challenges with daily life and academics. And through doing this, we've helped them both of those to improve. Okay, so we've responded to that challenge of adapting our therapeutic techniques and meeting the unique needs of the client and the families we serve. So that's the point of today. I want to help you become more aware of this, those of you that aren't, and so that you can have a few more knowledge base and tools. And so here's our Luminarias mission. So we want to train you all, right? Bilingually, biculturally. And one of the specific needs that we're talking about today within our community and a subset of the community is this issue. Okay. So to read that for you. So we want to maximize the access and address the ASD clients as they are one of the most underserved, like I said, and marginalized groups therapeutically. Right? And the individuals with autism symptoms create barriers to their traditional CBT modality of treatment, right? So we need to be aware of that. Then we need to, and you can hear this word quite often, adapt, right? Adapt to the client, to their special needs and specific issues they're going on with them. And so our mission, we want to be sensitive to this population, to their needs of the individual on the autism spectrum, have a brighter tomorrow as well, right? And so that's the challenge. And so today's presenters are going to be Rosalinda Cárdenas, Director of Education and Outreach for Luminarias. And so she has been with us since the beginning, well, not the beginning of Luminarias, because she was working with LAUSD for over 36 years. And she has both experiences, both an educator and administrator, and over 30 schools, and specialized in overseeing special education services and programs, as well as being an instructional specialist within LAUSD, and especially in particular with students with special needs. All right, after her, we'll have Brian Davis, who has been with Luminarias first as a practicum student from CSUN MST program, and he left us working on the Valley with the Children's Services Agency, where he gained more practical experience as well as a lot of training, working with young children in particular, and which helped him hone his skills as a therapeutic techniques to support these clients with special needs. And he's currently, he returned to us and is working as with Luminarias, Luminarias Community Services piece of our agency. Okay, and our final presenter is Jeanette Rodriguez. And she's worked for many years as a special education paraprofessional for schools in LEOSD before entering CSUN's MFT program as well. Is that correct, Jeanette? Yes?
No, I went to a Nationals MFT program.
So I didn't look up your resume. So I might be. Anyway, she went MFT program, and then she came and I met her over at another agency. And then since that time, she's been developing her hours and getting more experience working with this population, not only with children, but with adults. And she's currently a therapist with the United Community Services. And as I said, she worked with the special needs and children and adults, and has completed her training hours and is ready to get her licensing, right, Jeanette? They're waiting for her to be licensed any minute.
Yes, any minute now.
So with that, I'm going to turn things over, okay, to Sabina, and here she comes.
Good morning. We're excited about sharing some of our experience that we've had in Luminarias in terms of working with clients and working with families, that we've been able to kind of address the specific needs that they have in order to get access to the therapy that we are offering here, our therapy services, from beginning to end, from the time we reach out to the families to when we're doing intake, through the therapeutic process that you all are using, and even after perhaps running into issues where you might find a lot of psychoeducation is necessary, because our families are really coming from a different perhaps background that others may have in the mainstream regarding how to address the unique needs and just kind of how to see things forward as parents, as families, siblings, even our staff working in the schools that we have in our area that we are servicing. Historically, there's been that taboo with looking and reaching out for mental health services. But in addition, there has also been a real reluctance to look at the realities that your child may have special needs. And with those special needs, how we might be able to adapt to support them. So I know Dr. C kind of shared some of my background. Overall, I would just like to say I've been an advocate for individuals with disabilities since from the beginning of my own history, simply because we've had individuals in our family, and myself included, that may have been mislabeled or perhaps have been stereotyped based on some limiting information or even some cultural differences that really did impact the individuals and really fulfilling, their just having a happier life growing up. But with that said, I've always had a heart towards working with the underserved, just as you all do, and no more underserved than a population of individuals that have been marginalized historically. So when we speak about special needs, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of share what are we talking about. And in this slide on special needs can mean very, very, very many things. It's stated from thriving with a condition that challenges a single aspect of daily life to coping with something that forces you to learn a new normal. The term special needs is used to describe a person with a physical or emotional difficulty or difference that requires more assistance or specialized services. A special need individual with a special need can enhance someone's life, though, in a very, very unique way. In the same way, it can cause challenges. Someone with special needs may need help with vital activities ranging from movement or communication to making important decisions and taking care of themselves. Delays in development are typically apparent very early in life, but some aren't obvious until a person reaches a certain level in their education. early intervention is key for managing and a developmental special need. I'm going to just take a moment to tell you that my experience in the back and with education has been with students as young as 2 years old, as they were entering into our system, parents who had come to the schools, their local schools, and perhaps were transferring from regional center where they had received, been assessed and then received services. And then they, the state then hands them over to the local education system. In this case, it would be the School of Residence. And I kind of wanted to share that. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but just wanted to share that many times just working with the families and seeing just how much they really focus on the strengths of their child, not on the limitations when they come in, because there's so much that they see their child having had advanced, and then coming into a system where they then start comparing, and there's a lot of comparison with the typical normal child of their age. Then that becomes a realization that something is wrong. And then the focus then is no longer strength-based, but really needs-based. So special needs has, I've always kind of really focused on that first aspect of the idea that special needs can enhance someone's life. And so we focus on the ways that it has been able to enhance their life in the family as well as the child. There are 4 categories of special needs. There's physical, and you can see the different areas that kind of fall under, and many of those are, you know, are eligibilities or diagnosis, I should say, that you are familiar with. Very medical, developmental, and under developmental there you will see autism. And autism then is considered developmental because it's enhanced, it's impairing in some way. The characteristics or symptoms indicate that their developmental processes in some way have been impaired. And you can recognize that at an early age. And it actually rears more and more its head as they start to be challenged. Our students start to be challenged later on with different tasks that become extremely difficult, and really it would require a lot of adaptations and accommodations, supports for them to get things done. Behavioral emotional is another of the 4 categories, and you can see there, you might want to, I wanted to highlight that there is the stress, or there is post-traumatic stress disorder. It does fall under behavioral emotional, anxiety, depression, attention deficits. These are things that I wanted you to realize that how the client with autism may have co-occurring issues and disorders and even eligibilities. So when we're looking at an eligibility, you could only have one eligibility legally, but it doesn't mean that we're not taking into account, it's an umbrella perhaps, the one that best describes. However, under that umbrella, you may find various other eligibilities. So in this case, we're looking at a student with autism. However, that student with autism presents with anxiety, depression, maybe attention deficit, hyperactivity. And we'll talk more about those with the case studies that Brian and Jeanette will be sharing with you. I wanted to share some of the legal guarantees. It's very important to be aware of the legal guarantees for individuals with disabilities with special needs. As I said, I've been an advocate. I'd love for you all to be advocates as well and be ambassadors, and just know that there are legal guarantees that will allow for supports and those needed supports that our clients will be perhaps needing help to navigate a system. And today is not a day where you will learn all the legalities or all the process, but instead you'll be given resources, some background, and a protocol that we use here, kind of standard operating procedures that we use here at Luminarias. And we are very fortunate to have the team that we have with the background that we have. So we'll share a little bit about how we hopefully expect our interns and our therapists to reach out to us at Luminarias, and how we can do that so that we can work together to navigate and support the needs. of the individual and also of the family. So the legal guarantees, as you probably have been reading, is a person might be born with a special need, or they may develop later in life. A child with special needs has access to special education sanctioned by the U.S. Department of Education under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. For short, we call it IDEA. This law defines which children are eligible for early intervention services, free public special education, and related services. And that is very important. You can imagine the therapies that are involved and the cost compared to support the unique needs. Well, the monies come from the federal government, if not from there, from the state. And of course, we then are able then to provide in-school free public education with the supports and the related services and interventions that are necessary. That needs to be done with a process that will, by way of an IEP that we'll talk about in a bit. The IEP then is linked to if the child then qualifies under IDEA, then they get an IEP. You don't just hand them out. They have to go through the assessment process. There's a whole process and evaluation, and there's a meeting, and then there's a determination at that meeting regarding the eligibility, and then what are their present levels, and from the present levels, what are the goals, and from the goals, what are the supports in order to meet those goals. And even, which would include accommodations, sometimes even modifications, but in particular, the unique individuals who have the skills to provide those accommodations and supports and services. Beyond children and youth, benefits.gov offers resources, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, prohibits discrimination to those with special education within schools, workplaces, and public spaces. Knowing the basics of some of these special needs can help to better understand those coping and living a successful life with their condition. It's important to note that when a person perhaps doesn't rise to the level of requiring, or rather meeting the criteria for an IEP, we then look at still he may or she may need some supports or accommodations, something different that would help them access, and it wouldn't require perhaps a specialized class or specialized curriculum or a specialist to work with them. It may then be that we look, if they don't meet the criteria for eligibility under IDEA, we look at ADA, and we look at something that's called a 504 plan. So in schools, we have 504 plans for many students who perhaps need some extra considerations, given that they have a suspected disability or a diagnosed disability that may require maybe a lower level of supports, and maybe some things that we can do to help them just have better access. Because under ADA, the Disabilities Act, we cannot discriminate, and we cannot hold them back from really accessing education because of their special needs. We have to support and help. So with that said, we're going to move on. So that's the big thing. 504s for ADA and IEPs for IDEA. Okay. For autism spectrum disorder, which is what we're speaking about today, we just wanted to give you a couple slides that kind of talk about some important things about autism disorder, spectrum disorder, ASD. Verbal and nonverbal communication can be affected by autism. And as I kind of go through this, be thinking about as yourself, as a therapist, how that would impact how you're working and doing, interacting, and the interactions you would like to have and meeting your therapeutic goals. So, and again, I do want to note that the communication, it does affect verbal and nonverbal communication. That's the criteria. And it should be evident before age 3. It's not like they had a car accident when they were 12 and then all of a sudden they have this. No, that's not autism. It's, you see it as they start developing. And actually there's a lot of wonderful, I guess there's screenings that our pediatricians do. I have a granddaughter and she's going on 2. not quite 2. And every time she's gone in, they are asking these questions about how she's engaging her developmental stages. And they really are doing some screening along the way to make sure there's, to just double check that there's no red flags that they need to address. So if there is, the pediatrician is one who would more than likely support the parents, and if there are any issues, to go to regional center and see about an evaluation with because they have some concerns, perhaps in their communication. They're not speaking at all by, let's say, or they're having very limited eye contact. They do very little social interaction. So here, you know, where a person falls on the autism spectrum can affect their educational performance and social interaction. Common characteristics associated with autism includes repetitive activities and resistance to change in routines. Autism may also fall under sensory impaired special needs, which, as you recall, that was one of the 4 categories under developmental. Let's see if I can move this down. Okay. So the autism spectrum disorder has been redefined as per the DSM-5, and this is the inclusion. It's been it was changed a bit back, I believe, in 2013. So here it is: autism spectrum disorder is characterized by qualitative impairments in social communication and a restricted, repetitive pattern of behavior, interest, or activities. There is a high prevalence of co-occurring mental health problems, particularly emotional disorders in autistic people. And I don't like how it says autistic people, because we don't put the disability before people. It's people before disabilities, but it is the way it is, according to this one researcher. So autistic people, with studies reporting 53% experiencing a mood disorder, and less than 50% an anxiety disorder at some point in their lives. So these are maybe individuals that you will be working with. They come in, they're very anxious, and then they come in saying, I'm just feeling really anxious. But then as you start to kind of scrape the surface and get a little deeper, you realize, oh, there's some other issues. And so it's co-occurring disorders. The clinical features and cognitive differences characteristic of ASD mean autistic people, there's that word, there's that phrase again, require adaptations to standard evidence-based psychological treatments to adequately meet their needs. And this is from the Department of Public Health. They have guidelines, and this is the report. You could look that up. And we will be referring to a lot of them in terms of adaptations and working with individuals with autism. Adapting your therapeutic approaches then, which is what that is about. Again, such adaptations include an increased use of written and visual information. Again, because of how the impairment might impact verbal and nonverbal communications, it's important to maybe, not maybe, but definitely look at what you can do as a therapist when providing for written and visual information, and maybe doing some adaptations to how you're doing that, and when and how much you're doing that through your therapy. Emphasizing behavioral change over cognitive approaches. A lot of it has to do with specific behaviors that repetitive behaviors that may, or perhaps even behaviors that have to do with the way you interact or not interact socially. So that might be, although they may be coming in with trauma, you might also look at how perhaps some of those behavioral goals may be, or changes might be goals as well, or at least considerations, definitely. And maybe start there before maybe going towards the cognitive approaches. Having well explained guidance and rules and therapy. Everybody loves structure, but I'm telling you my experience with individuals with autism, they can really, and that is one of the gifts. They are so well organized. They like things in certain ways. If things are not in that way, they will make sure you know that it's kind of bugging them. And so there's a lot of things to be said in that when you're putting together your sessions involving a friend, family member, or care provider. There are a lot of supports that are needed in the life of of an individual with, an individual with special needs, in particular with individual with autism. And that support group is very important to include. As you all know, with family systems, this is one of those highlights in care providers, getting information and being able to use them as supports as well, and support them, very importantly. Having breaks, incorporating special interest, and avoiding ambiguous use of language. There's more later to come in regards to these recommendations and others that we'll be speaking to. Maureen Davis in 2010 report that another common adaptation is to target autism related deficits, such as in social skills or adaptive behaviors, to ensure the success of mental health intervention. Very, very important. It's almost like when you do your goals, your CPT, you want to include the important goal of where the individual is, they're at presently with their social skills and perhaps their adaptive behaviors. And that may be something, that's within your scope. If not within your scope, then you reach out and we discuss how might we provide for some supports for the client. We have common misconceptions, very important. These recent researchers here and internationally have refuted the common misconception among therapists who are unaware that by adapting treatment methods, individuals with ASD can benefit and improve their mental health disorders. We, again, going back to our mission, we want to make our mental health services accessible to all people. And maybe in the past, not maybe, but definitely in the past, there was a misconception, perhaps within certain therapists that thought because they have ASD to a certain degree that they could not really make any type of headway in meeting any kind of therapeutic goals. But that is a common misconception. There is evidence, and there are these various different reports. You could look them up. They're very interesting. And I just pulled a few out, but there is evidence that when adapted evidence-based psychological interventions can be effective in the treatment of a range of common mental health problems in autistic people. Much of the clinical research has been on interventions within a cognitive behavioral framework with a focus on anxiety problems. Systematic reviews highlight the clinical effectiveness of adapted cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, for common mental health problems in autistic adults and anxiety conditions in autistic children. So yes, indeed, you have evidence, recent evidence, I guess, is recent in the 2015, 2013, where you're able to see that by doing these adaptations, you can indeed make headway with some of the therapeutic goals. What we use when we say we as an educator, I still consider myself an educator, having been one for over 35 years. I would say that we look at the IEP because it's a roadmap for anyone who is providing services at schools. So since we're school-based, we should definitely have access to that IEP and make sure that when we see that a student has an eligibility, because the IEP is, it can be used as a roadmap many times. Because autism spectrum disorder is very complex and it differs from person to person, we can't just stereotype and think that what worked with one client who was on the spectrum is going to work with the next. They're very unique in evaluations that are given that really provide a lot of wonderful information for anyone working with the client who is on who has ASD. a complex developmental condition that can include restrictive or repetitive behaviors. To what degree? That's what the IEP would tell you. They would tell you their present levels, and they would then be able to tell you where they hope they can move or work with the individual within the year to get them to meet perhaps these goals under behavior, under social interaction, under academic, under their speech, even occupational therapy, various different counseling goals as well we have at schools. So it would behoove us to use the IEP as a roadmap because the work has kind of been done for us there. And it is a yearly document that's updated. And we have meetings yearly. Every 3 years, we do in-depth full psychoeducational evaluations. That would also be super helpful as well. Each of these areas has a wide array of specific conditions, and some individuals may express elements from more than one area. The important thing is to be able to recognize the specific challenges of your child or your adult, where the child and the adult is facing, and identify the right supports, therapy, and interventions to help them. And that's what an IEP does. So that's very helpful. So this is what we do here at Luminarias, standard operating procedures for Luminarias clients with ASD. Once the child or the adult client in your care has received a diagnosis or eligibility through a psychoeducational evaluation through the IEP process, they have documented accommodations and supports written into the IEP that will be available by requesting a copy from the parent. We cannot request from the school. We request from the parent. The parent, for some reason, may not even be aware that they have an IEP. I've actually had parents who do not realize that they were to keep the IEP, or after signing it, it wasn't explained to them. And then there's other parents who have a whole notebook from the first IEP to the most current IEP in chronological order. So there's just, if they do not have the IEP, just encourage the parent to request the IEP from their schools, and the schools will be able to provide them with it. And then they can then, of course, share it with you. Once you get a copy of the IEP, I or your supervisor are available to review the IEP to help identify the supports that help you, the clinician, to adapt your therapy sessions to meet the unique needs of your client. If an IEP is not available and or official ASD has not been diagnosed, and you have some certain suspicions and red flags, we are available to guide you, the therapist, we as in, myself or your supervisor, and to guide you, the therapist and the parent, in requesting the appropriate evaluation through your client's school of residence or regional center. Okay. Technical difficulty. I'm gonna
No, what happened to my slide? Just kidding.
I don't know.
We good to go?
There's me. Okay, well, Brian is really up next, and we're going to, I know we're kind of fidgeting over here with our PowerPoint, our slide presentation. I hope that doesn't impact you too much, Brian. There you go. It is you're up, Brian. Thank you.
Of course, can you switch to the next slide, please?
Sure. There you go.
Perfect. So just to give you a little bit more background, I began working with clients on the spectrum as a behavioral therapist for the Behavioral Learning Center. I did that for almost 2 years before even entering grad school. So a lot of the bulk of my knowledge comes from that viewpoint of a strictly behavioral therapy. Most of the cases I dealt with were pretty high severity or low functioning, primary diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and I'll touch on that a bit. So just for my own curiosity, I was hoping I could see a raise of hands for anybody that's worked with somebody doing therapy with somebody on the spectrum. Right. So I saw one of, oh, 2, 3, nice. I'm kind of curious because actually, can we get it to the next slide, please? Does anybody feel brave enough to share what their expectations were? Because that's kind of what the slide's about, expectations. Anybody brave enough to share what they were thinking going into that case or their worries or concerns? Feel free to jump.
Brian.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think just in regards to expectation, not having had the experience prior to that was, you know, expectations, same, meeting with the client, going through a list of assessment questions, didactic, and just, you know, move on from one question to the other and just easy peasy zip through it, right?
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else feel like they want to chime in? Anybody? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Charles had something to say.
Just realizing how much adaptation was needed. I think I didn't start to notice any of the mental health concerns beyond the primary diagnosis, ASD, until I started to incorporate interests. And it seems like, oh, that's a given, but even much more so in session when working with someone on the spectrum.
I like that a lot. And actually, that's something that I touch on just a bit. I think what you're saying is actually pretty critical. So I guess the first point I'd like to make is that these kiddos, these teenagers, adolescents, adults, they are far more capable than most people give them credit for, whether that's their family, friends, society, and occasionally even us as therapists. So another thing I probably think would be important to mention is that when discussing these expectations, especially from like family and friends, oftentimes it's coming from a place of love and wanting what's best for the client. Parents' expectations are kind of surrounded around that, and which can be good, but it also can have some, you know, negative consequences we want to address. So I've seen both ends. So for caregivers, I've had unrealistic expectations, like they want their kids to get married, to have kids, have a child that's like a lawyer or a doctor. And I've seen the opposite side, only expecting that this kid can do these basic hygiene or feeding themselves. And tying into the last part of my bullet there is we have to help manage some of these expectations. And these can be difficult conversations to have with caregivers of maybe we're setting the bar a little bit too high. Maybe that's unrealistic. Or the opposite, like, hey, I think they're far more capable than we're giving them credit for. Let's push them, let's challenge them, see what we can get out of it. Let's see, am I the only one that can't see the next slide?
No, Dr. C, would you mind clicking on number 15? Because we're still on, we can all just see Rosie's slide.
We're working on it.
Working on it.
Thank you. Okay, I'll keep moving. Another area is society. Unfortunately, a lot of my experience
What do
is
you
that.
see now? Up here it says slide 17. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm seeing the same thing, standard operating procedure.
I think sometimes it helps to like unshare and then share again.
Stop share. Right?
Don't worry, everybody. We got this. We'll get there together. Beautiful. I think it's 2 slides back. I see interventions. Yay. All right. Beautiful.
Okay.
So society, I've run into this numerous times, is that there's these lowered expectations for the differently able, especially autism spectrum disorder. During the small amount of time, few years that I've been in the field, like I've seen it improve slightly, but still not enough. And this is kind of where we can advocate not just for our clients, but for their families. So this could be an IEP, a 504, going to the school, group therapy, social skills groups, you name it. It also means that we have work to do with our clients. I've come across a few that they'd set their own bar kind of low, that these expectations that society places on them of what they're capable of is kind of lower their own bars as to what they can do and achieve, this false sense of what they're capable of. So be the light for the people, push them, challenge them to do their best. I guess last but not least would be therapist expectations. This is one that kind of touched on earlier, but I think was important is, for me, it was to pace myself. Much like other clients, we want to meet them where they're at. For me, an intern or a trainee or, AMFT, there's a few times I was frustrated at the pace of therapy. Like, why aren't we further along? Like, am I doing enough? Could I be doing more? And that was something I had to kind of step back and look at for myself. That it's good to have these goals. It's good to want your clients to succeed and move forward and achieve. But again, kind of taking it back to meeting the client where they're at, and the pace might be a little bit slower, and that's okay too. All right, next slide, please.
I believe you have control now, Brian. Do you want to give it a try?
Give it a shot. Uh-oh. I'm just clicking through the whole presentation. I can move forward, but not backwards.
All right, you want me to go backward?
Yeah, pretty please.
Slide which?
It would be areas to consider, so it'd be my second slide. Oh, is that it?
Just the arrow, doctor, so you can press on the arrow.
Oh, hold on. I think I might actually have it.
Now you're doing it.
Yay. Okay, thank you. Areas to consider, additional challenges. So kind of what I was touching on a second ago is extra time may be needed with the client. Whether that's to develop trust, the engagement with them, the rapport, not just the client, but their families. Some of the families that I've worked with tend to be kind of insulated and cautious. They question whether or not you can reach their child, enter their world, build that relationship. I've had transfers where they were about to pull the client out and they gave me one shot, one chance at the meeting because they were worried about their client joining. Be patient and just kind of keep in mind the relationship alone accounts for nearly 30% of treatment outcomes. So take the time to build that rapport, engage them in preferred activities, ask them what they like to do, explore those interests, find ways to enter their world. Tracking the client. So telehealth is an additional challenge of keeping them focused and interested in session. Much like any of our other clients, or especially the kiddos, is how do we keep them engaged in the session? For me, what I've noticed is that it's okay to have a mix of preferred activities and the talk therapy. It's okay to switch it up. Try and find their interests and integrate that into what they're doing. Keeping them engaged and tracking them is also important. Looking to see if they're checking out on you. Maybe they have a sensory need. Maybe they're withdrawing into themselves. How do we pull them back out? So much like any of our other clients, tracking is important. But again, I think there's an additional layer there that we have to kind of be aware of. Adapting to client needs would be like being aware of sensory. So for instance, good ways, I've had kids that get really antsy. Like I'm a bit fidgety myself. Some of them get really antsy. So doing some kind of physical activity or a movement meditation, showing videos, having more visual stuff or more sounds or auditory, trying to find out what it is kind of sensory needs they have, which you can find out by talking with family or the client. So yeah, that's that. And kind of like Charles was talking about, his biggest thing is to be flexible and adaptable in your approach. Something isn't working, it's okay to comment on it, switch it up. Trust me, that perfect intervention may be something they find excruciatingly boring. It's happened to me plenty of times. Come up with this idea, it's going to be great, and ends up not being all that fun. Actually, I think we went one. There we go. Creating opportunities. So I had this client who was hyper focused on Magic the Gathering. That's all I wanted to talk about. That's all I wanted to do. He was on the spectrum. And so my challenge there was finding a way of how do I integrate this into the treatment? Being a nerd in this particular moment, I was in luck. I was a Magic the Gathering nerd back in school. So I had all of these decks and all these cards. And so we would start off by, doing like a little, 2-minute meditation. And then we would play Magic the Gathering. But every other turn, we would work on one of the goals. For him, it was social skills. So we would play like one round, and then we would go around and he would introduce himself to 3 different people in the office. He would say, we would play a few more rounds. He would, do something else. And so this is a way of creating these opportunities by incorporating their interest into it. And I think when he graduated, what I did was we had been building a deck together. And so he got to take his, therapy deck home with him. So as discussed, the bulk of my experiences comes from behavioral therapy. That's where I worked with lots and lots of kids and teenagers on the spectrum. A lot of it is focused on behavioral therapies, mass trials, which is basically doing the same thing over and over and over again, learning a skill to ensure they master the skill. And it's supposed to be something like 80% over the month for a large number of trials. I guess you can relate that to our therapy by, let's see, my client will utilize coping strategies 25 times a week, ensuring they practice and master the skill. So I guess that would be the correlation. DTT, or discrete tile training, is actually much more helpful. It sounds intense. Breaking it down, you break down more complex ideas or goals or interventions into smaller, more manageable pieces. So one way we can do this is by incorporating kind of that idea into our therapeutic goals. The example I came up with would say you have this goal. Client will increase the ability to emotionally express themselves to parents from 0 times a week to 5 times a week. Kind of boring, I know, but how do we break that down? And so this is where it gets kind of interesting. So you can really break that down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Client will identify when angry, sad, or frustrated to a parent when prompted from blank to blank times a week. Client will be able to identify and express what caused them to feel angry, sad, frustrated from blank to blank times a week. Client will be able to use deep breathing when prompted by a caregiver when angry, sad, or frustrated from blank to blank times a week. So we have this kind of overarching goal up here, and we can break that down into smaller and smaller pieces. Can even take it a step forward. The client will be able to self-regulate by engaging in deep breathing from blank to blank times a week. Now, play therapy, that's where my heart is. I could literally go on for days about play therapy. I love it. One of the main tenets, I guess, to get across would be that the play is actually the therapy for younger kids. Their play is what they know. It's how they express themselves. Like that is one of their modes of communication, especially the younger they are. So a lot of times the play is what's helping them to process things that are happening. And a big part of that is following their lead and joining in their world, engaging them, having them bring you into that. So one example that I came up with for this. So I had a 6-year-old female that was on the spectrum, and the family had been in like a mild fender bender. Nobody was hurt. Ambulance did have to get called. So the trauma for this kid was the sound of the sirens. So whenever she was anywhere and there was like, cop sirens, fire engines, ambulances, it would set her off and trigger her, and she would kind of start stimming and going into other repetitive behaviors. And what I did was I brought out a bunch of cars and some ambulances and stuff, and then I watched her as she would recreate this accident over and over again, running these cars into each other, bringing an ambulance in. I would slowly try and kind of get my way in there and be one of the cars. And she must have done this over the course of 3 sessions, a few hundred times, just over and over again. What I came to realize is that was her processing the incident. That was her working through what had happened again and again, and then One time she was like, no cars, just done. I don't want to play with cars anymore. And the sirens didn't have that triggering effect on her anymore. So I just think that that's a good example of how play can be used to process things with all kids, but in this case, it was somebody that was on a spectrum. Emotional Candyland, I'm sure probably some, if not most of you know this one. You assign emotions to different colors. Examples would be, so they land on red, show me what anger looks like, or show me surprise, oh. Or you can do, you can, again, like your imagination is key here. So name one thing that makes you angry, maybe next time. Following that, name one time you remember being angry. What did you do when you were angry last time? And so Candyland's a good one because you can do it via telehealth, and it's pretty simple. A lot of parents with kids have it, or not. You can make up your own game board. Again, I just want to say that like the only limitation for like play therapy and these interventions is our creativity. And it's okay to think outside of the box, come up with a different idea, try something out for the first time, like give it a shot. I think you'd be surprised. So a couple of things I did want to share with you is, so the shared folder resource Dropbox. This is going to be in the resource Dropbox file. And what it is, it's going to be my play therapy training. So let me see if I can share this. If I do this, it's going to stop screen sharing. Let me finish the links up first. All right, so telehealth resources, as you know, telehealth is an additional challenge that we have to face. Kind of as I touched on earlier, with people on the autism spectrum, maybe even more so. So what I did was I set a couple of links up. One of them is actually a Word doc that has tons and tons of strictly just telehealth links. Sandboxes, play therapy, interactive puzzles, meditations, you name it, it's there. And then the actual link that you have at the bottom, HTTP one, is it's called EPSD, which I'm going to show you that in just 1 second too. I use this one all the time. I love this resource. So that's why I wanted to share that with you. Let's see here. All right, so can everybody see my screen? Nodding heads? Yep, perfect. So this is basically what you're going to see in the shared resource folder for the play therapy. That's the PowerPoints. I had actually attended a 3-day training and got like the little baby beginner certificate into play therapy. And so that's all the PowerPoints that I went through. This is actually pretty good. Intake, assessing, psychoeducation, relationship maps, limitations, cultural sensitivity, re-traumatizing play. Like, I love this, so highly recommend. Most of you will probably find yourself here though. Interventions. So these are all the interventions that they introduced in the training. A lot of them are really good. Berkeley puppet interview, fantastic. I'm not going to go through them all, but there's some really, really good ones. If you're curious and you wanted like a couple of recommendations, hit me up. I'm more than happy to share them with you. All right, so that would be the shared folder. Let's see if I can pull up the next one. All right, so this is EPSD. This was the link on the bottom that I was doing. This one, fantastic. We got like musical stuff, so you can hit that auditory, sensory need, visual relaxation, same thing, hitting the visual needs. There's mindfulness in here, guided imagery. If they're angry, there's an animal cam where you can watch like little kittens and dogs like frolicking around. Try and be mad and watch it. I'm telling you, it's not happening. Movement meditation, so you get the physical thing, puzzles and games. And the puzzles are interesting too, because you can pick whatever puzzle you want, but it's interactive. So even via telehealth, you can build a puzzle together. So that one I've had a lot of success with. And last but not least, let me go ahead and share my telehealth resource link. And this is also what you're going to find in the shared folder. And this one is, like I was saying, these are all links, active links to all the different types of play and sandboxes and storyboards and puppet shows. this stuff you can really tie it into the therapy, keeping them engaged while also like working on your goals and role plays, things like that. Let's see. I think that's about it. Sorry, somebody will have to restart the PowerPoint though. My bad. And then for me, that is it. Thank you all for your attention. Appreciate you. It's all you, Jeanette.
Okay, I'm getting the help to do that, Brian.
Yeah, my bad. I didn't realize.
So let's share some stuff. Now.
Camera's on.
Oh, and if you go to the play therapy thing, it's called the best emotion wheel. Check it out. Half the sides for when your needs are met. The other half is when your needs are not met. It's got, the core emotions, and it builds out so you can really work on emotional expression, identification, emotional vocabulary, and how you feel when like your needs are met or not met. And absolutely not a problem at all. Thank you.
Oh, and then Brian, I'm going to give you control so you can like click away and do your thing. Oh, sorry. Give it to Jeanette. My bad. Sorry.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Ben.
There you go. Jeanette, do you have control of it now?
Yes, I do.
Wonderful. Cool.
Okay. Awesome. So hi, everyone. What I'm going to do is present some case studies. I believe. Hold on, give me a second. Okay, yeah. So one of my roles, obviously, with Luminarias is the community. And then aside from Luminarias, I also do work with another agency, and I provide the services for the IEP. So this particular organization sends out the providers that Rosie was talking about at the beginning of when she presented. They sent out the providers to schools, and I am one of the IEP members. So I get to write the goals for the IEPs for the social emotional part, and I provide that service for the students. So one of the case studies, I don't know why it keeps going back to that one. So one of the, so the first one that I'm going to share, I'm going to share, how that could help you with doing your school case studies, whether it's individual or group counseling. I think some of you might be going into campuses, but if not, there are, plenty of resources that Brian just gave us that we can do online. And I've also done it, obviously when the kids were all in the pandemic and going from staying home and doing school from Zoom, then we also had to provide our services via Zoom. So in individual counseling, is very important to establish a routine, right? I worked with a 5-year-old, so kindergarten, child in the autism spectrum. And the way that I kind of focused him every session and played a routine, it was, we started our session by saying, hi, how are you? Made sure that he was looking at the camera. And then we started with a 1 minute, no more than that, breathing video. And it's going to be right there. It's really annoying. Okay, it's this first YouTube link right here. That's the video. Let me see if I click on it. Will it take me? Probably take me out of the presentation, and I don't want to do that. So it is there, but it's a blowfish. And all it does is when you inhale in, the blowfish goes up. And then when you have to exhale out, it goes down. And so, this is really helpful with students and clients in the spectrum because it provides that visual for them. And it kind of keeps them entertained, right? So not necessarily having to give anybody that eye contact that they might be having a difficulty with, but they're just staring at the screen. And And so this particular student knew that that's the way we started. And then we went into whatever we were going to be working on, his goal and his IEP. And then right before the session ended, we would say, okay, fish time again. And then we would do that, right? Obviously, if we're working for students that are a little bit older, I would say middle school and high school, there is another breathing exercise here that I also linked that is more appropriate for older students. Also, not a lot of visuals, because we don't want the to overwhelm them, you know, with so many things in the screen. But it is just, I think this one is kind of just a triangle that goes around as it's talking to them and telling them when to breathe in and when to breathe out. So I found those two very helpful to set a routine for my sessions with them, especially through telehealth. Some of the things that we're going to be working on, obviously, is going to be with clients on the spectrum. It's going to be feeling identification, because that is one of the impairments, right? Being able to have some of those connections. And so feeling identification is really important. How is it that feeling, how to identify that feeling in your body? So maybe it's like when those butterflies are in your stomach, you know, is that anger? Is that anxiety? Is that do you feel nervous, right? When you are losing focus or when you don't want to do something, are you bored now? So a lot of feeling identification. And I put the therapist aid there. That's a great website for all of us to look into resources. They have free printables. So anything free is always great for us. So that's why, you know, YouTube and any of these free resources that we can get our hands on are great. Another thing that we want to work on with our school case studies is, or school cases, are nonverbal communication with peers, right? What is that? What does it look like when you're talking to somebody and then maybe somebody walks away or looks away? What, you know, for them to be able to understand what that means. That's another area that for individuals with autism, they have a hard time understanding, right? These nonverbal communication, what does that mean? They have the social cues are many times lacking. So we want to go ahead and be able to provide that for them and model that. And so we can model that with flashcards. We can model that with a lot of role playing. And I think with telehealth, that's definitely going to be our biggest area, especially with working with students in the autism spectrum, depending on where they fall in the umbrella. A lot of this role playing that can go on. And then group counseling, I feel like we can do all of this because also they are understanding those verbal cues, right? So I've had to do some group. I do like a little social group with maybe 4 or 5 students. Most of them are elementary school, 3rd grade. And so I present different topics like making friends, trouble with friends, any of those, you know, feelings or any social interactions that a child with autism might have a hard time understanding. One of the things for this particular student that I'm talking about, he thinks that when people don't want to engage in the game he wants for sure that day, like he's stuck on that game, then, well, you're not my friend, you're a bully. You know, because they tell him, no, I don't want to play with you. And so the way that he interprets that is they don't want to be my friend, and they're being bullied because they're being bullies because they're being mean to me, right? So this is where for him, group counseling was just added into his IEP. And it's great for him because he's getting to actually see that other people or the other his peers is not that they don't want to be his friends. It's just something, sometimes they just want to play something else, or sometimes it's okay that, you know, they don't want to engage in stuck in whatever he wants to play, right? So yes, meeting the kids where they're at. Some of our sessions might be shorter for the schools. I know that sometimes our sessions, they can only handle 30 minutes. And so a lot of times when we are reviewing these IEPs with Rosie or even with our supervisors, we will see some of these social emotional goals as them just providing 30 minutes of service. And we have to keep in mind, before I started working in the schools, I would say 30 minutes, what is that gonna do, right, for social emotional? But once you start actually looking at the goals and looking at the students, we can do a lot in 30 minutes. And that can really help them, especially because of all of these things that we really do have to incorporate and teach them. So that is something that we can do with our school cases. And then the next case that I want to present is one that came to us through I believe it was CPS, but then transferred to Luminarias. Sorry, it just keeps skipping. Okay, so this is a 15-year-old ninth grader, and his mom came in actually seeking services for him. So, you know, I did the intake, and his mom's biggest concern was he's not making any progress in school. His communication was a little bit of like lacking, but her biggest concern was just school. And so talking to her, I asked, you know, what are his grades like? What are your biggest concerns? So again, a lot of pulling in the intake, a lot of information gathering from mom first. I think I did a full session with mom, and then I did a session with my client. And so I gathered all the information that mom needed. I tend to always, you know, the key things that I look for in my intakes is if they're telling me that they're struggling with focus, they're struggling with, you know, any social connections, like not having enough friends, any of that. Mom actually thought that her son was having ADHD because of the focus problem and the retention. So he didn't know how to read. Those were kind of her words. And so then I asked, you know, does he have any special needs? Does he have an IEP? And she was forthcoming with that. She said that he had an IEP. And so, you know, that's like, okay, I need to ask for it, right? So these are things that we kind of keep in mind and jot down on our notes, like, okay, ask for the request, a copy of the IEP for mom. And so we did all of that. Then I met with the client, and again, we're talking about a 15-year-old ninth grader, right? So we kind of have to think, okay, what is a 15-year-old ninth grader? What is he gonna present like? And this 15-year-old did not present like a ninth grader, right? One, he was forthcoming and wanting to come to therapy, which that's a little odd already for a boy, right? A ninth grade, a 15-year-old boy that wants to come to therapy just willingly. We don't see that very often, although we see that, right? So when I met with him and he started talking to me, I started asking questions. He really did seemed like I was talking to a much younger child. And then my first session during my intake, I usually, you know, really just want to get to know them. And so I ask a lot of like, what's your favorite this? What's your favorite that? What do you like doing with friends? And he said he had no friends he has like, maybe he identified like 2 friends, no friends outside of school. He really didn't like being on his phone. So hello, red flag. What teen doesn't like being on their phone? And then no issues with parents or anything, but the way that he was talking to me, again, seemed very much childlike. So then I asked him, what's your favorite show to watch on TV? And I think at that time it was like when all the kids were into like anime and things like that. So that was my thing. Like he's going to say anime. And he said Paw Patrol. And so then I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, that's really cool. I have a 5-year-old. She loved Paw Patrol. So I knew Paw Patrol. But then also it was like, in my mind, red flag, 9th graders, 15-year-olds are not into Paw Patrol. And so kind of, again, pulling all of that now what am I dealing with, right? What level am I dealing with? So my thing was, okay, I need to get this IEP as fast as I can. And then took the case to supervision, talked it over with Dr. Cardenas, and then I, scheduled a Zoom with Rosie. Once I had the IEP, I sent it over, and she was able to help me. I can read IEPs and I can understand some of them, but she really was able to help me understand the psycho educational part of it, and really the testing and the scores that, that's like a school psychologist's job, and that's not part of my my area. And so, that's the scope that she definitely understands, and it's one of her strengths. And so we reviewed the IEP together. She helped me understand it a lot more. But we also noticed that in the last 2 IEPs, this child's scores had not changed, and his goals looked almost cut and paste. And so sometimes the schools have to do that. They don't have to do that, but they do that, right? They try to get away with this. So then, like Rosie said, we became advocates for mom. So what we wanted then, in order for this child to get the proper services, was to request a letter and request that this evaluation be moved up, because his 3-year evaluation was coming up. And again, like Rosie said, 3 years means they do a full evaluation. So school psychologist, OT, speech, any services that this child has, they're going to do a full evaluation all over again. So they did. So what I did was help mom write this letter. And so I posted this copy of the letter that I helped mom write it. And as you guys can tell, it's written for her, like she was writing it, right? Because it is her, we also have to understand that only they can request these things. So as in our role, we cannot do that. This has to come from parent. The best weapon that parents have are letters that they get stamped at the schools, and then timeline kind of starts rolling for schools to be in compliance. And then I think my role, I understood, I had limited time with the student. Like Rosie said, how much can this child participate in talk therapy? How much of that, of his cognitive, ability is going to be there for our sessions? So that changed my whole goal. That changed my whole approach to him, to my sessions with him. And also, it got me to understand that the one that needed a lot of the help was also mom, to understand the, the level of where her child was at. Another thing that came with this particular client was a regional center assessment that I also requested for mom. And in regional center, his eligibility was intellectually disabled. He was right at the border. So that's why he seemed so high functioning. And he was in a regular ed campus, special day class, but attended some regular ed classrooms. So right at the border, it was just, the school was not giving him that eligibility of ID, which is intellectually disabled. But he was still not being able to access the curriculum. This is a 9th grader. His reading level was a 1st grade level. And so, I did have to have a lot of sessions with mom and kind of help her understand, give her that psychoeducation of where her child's limitations were in terms of how far he's going to retain things, right? How far he's going to go in, let's say, academics, but that also didn't limit her child into being a successful member of society. That didn't limit him into being able to understand things. And the Regional Center Report for Autism, they were not able to give him that that eligibility with it, because they had done the interview telehealth. So the reporter put there that she needed to do that in person in order to fully assess autism. I think in my assessment, he may have very high functioning, but it was more of the intellectual disability that we were dealing with at this time, which was hard for mom to understand. Obviously, you know, it's like a grieving process and all of that. So it was really hard for mom to really get out of that denial and understand that her child, you know, was maybe not going to be able to go to medical school or go to, you know, any of these other maybe typical university or campuses, right? But they could still, we talked about programs that are in community colleges for students with disabilities. And we talked about that, and that could be something that is really empowering to parents and to our clients, to know that there's still things out there that they can access. So that's that. That's that case. I hope I didn't miss anything with that case. Resources. So here we know I was talking about what are some things that I do. YouTube, you know, I just kind of go in there and it's like, okay, what video is going to help me with today's topic or today's session? And I try to give a lot of visuals, a lot of things that we can do together. Feeling games like Brian was talking about, charts, some of the social skills books that I actually have and I use. I know the kids in this and these books look very, you know, like for elementary kids, but you can tailor these activities to any age, really. And that's kind of what I do. I did look some up last night, and there are some that are for like social skills for Asperger's adults or teenagers. And so if we just, you know, plug in the right words, we can definitely find a whole bunch of resources that we can pull from. But again, I think part of our role as therapists is really being able to adapt and kind of see, okay, does this help with my client, and can I tweak this so it can fit whatever we're talking about or what my goal is with this particular student or client. So that's it for me. Dr. C, you can take over now.
All right, can you hear me? Yes. And now are we on the same slide? Resources.
Yeah, we can all see that one.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, so good, thanks. I think that was a great explanation of things and lots of resources. As we see, it's like it can seem overwhelming. So I would really take advantage of, if you see the resources and you see those that came from Brian, to put yourself in contact with him so you can help hone down to which one probably be the best for what you're dealing with. Because it looked like there were hundreds. It's like there, and as well, Jeanette. And again, this is very, it's very overwhelming to see. It's like, I'm going to do a group. I haven't even done a regular group. I don't have that much experience. And now I'm going to do a group with kids with autism. That can really take your breath away, right? So be aware that it's a challenge, as I said earlier, but it's a challenge, and you have resources. And the clients, what I found is clients with that I've dealt with that were on the spectrum, that they actually usually exceeded what I thought. Actually, that's been my own bias, right? Because I don't have that experience. And so, but being able to hone in and get down to what it is, and I was surprised. I had an adult, mostly adults, and then young teenager, and to be able to have this person break through and share emotions that he hadn't shared since 40 years. Okay. Because that's when he last was in his 50s, and that's when he last kind of had this connection with his brother and his friends in his neighborhood when he used to ride a bike, you know. But this is a resource here, a very good one that Ms. Cardenas found, and it's very recent. And especially as you see here, it talks about other issues, right? Race, culture, so different issues that come. And so looking at that, so it really hones in on that. So I think it's another great resource for us to have. Okay. We just want to note that that's why we have that slide there. And then now we're here with questions and comments. So either in the chat, or if you want to speak up and say if there's something that you want more information on, or want to go back to, something that was brought up that you may have want some more clarification or expounding on, that now is the time. So I'll open it up to you all.
Go ahead, Charles.
Charles, go ahead.
Yes, and this is open to all the presenters, whoever feels like they'd want to comment on this. But I think when presented with the challenge of giving therapy to someone who might be on the spectrum, or there might be some sort of developmental or processing delay going on in addition to a mental health issue, I've often struggled with how to formulate like our kind of those assessment scales. I think initially, and I still struggle every now and then to kind of like adapt those assessment scales so that I'm still getting at the presence or lack of presence of any anxiety or depressive symptoms. So I'm just wondering what you found in presenting those GAD and PHQ-9 scales, adapting it when working with someone who may be on the spectrum.
I think, well, that's a great question, Charles. And I think for me, it takes time. I would say it takes time to hone in on those, on being able to do an assessment, right? And to like kind of have your style of assessment. I think as therapists, we all have a different style of reaching that assessment process. But the GAD and the PHQ-9, I might not present it the first day. If I see that person is having some difficulty, I might present until the second or even third session. And then maybe I might not even show it. Like for some of my clients, I tend to share my screen and have them read it with me. For others, I might feel like this might be too overwhelming for them to look at everything and see me clicking on their answer, right? And so I might not even do that. I'll just print out something and have it in front of me, and do it that way. Again, but I've also, I'm also new to doing everything via telehealth. And so I'm used to like when we were in the office and we just kind of did it paper notes and all of that. So I think we just all develop a different style, but I would say if you think that maybe your client might be overwhelmed by seeing all of the questions from the PHQ-9 and the GAD, maybe not sharing the screen, maybe just having printouts. And I do that. I have printouts of the GAD and the PHQ-9, and I just write it, even if I have to like upload it, or then just create one later when I'm inputting things in their folder. So I hope that helps.
Definitely, thank you.
It can also be helpful too, like in the case of me where I work mostly with like, younger kids, getting mom or dad's inputs, possibly even a sibling. Well, I don't usually go that route, but kind of getting a feel for who else is in the family and how are they seeing these things presented. Like, are they seeing it and kind of seeing if there's any similarities there, differences? Could be
Okay.
helpful.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tina.
I saw you nodding your head, Nahil. Any input?
Oh, I was about to say the same thing Brian said, partnering with the parents, getting their input, and then maybe taking a little bit more time assessing the child. I mean, if we can get the parents to give us maybe a basis of what might be going on, then we can take our time to present those questions to the client.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say just as we heard, adapt, right? So being able to, as Brian was saying earlier, it's like break it down. You have this, all right, we have the whole PHQ 9, even though there are 7, 9 questions our questionnaires are very small, right? But very short, but breaking it down and saying, okay, let's go with this question and kind of come to it, that particular question more more roundabout, we could say, in terms of really going into that area and seeing about, because a lot of times I think with persons are like, they're not used to repeating back certain verbiage. Okay, so being able to see what verbiage are they comfortable with, and that's a part of them, you know, us seeing this like, oh, I'm going to evaluate them on this over time, right? First, I need to have the client kind of educate them as to what this area even means for them, and I need to find that out, right? So that's, you know, so I like saying that, you know, therapy itself is a continual assessment process, right? Well, the intake is the initial assessment, right? To get an idea. So being able to see, it's like, well, we're assessing, how do they perceive, how do they look at the world, what are they sensitive to, what are they unaware of, right? And so that's why it's so good if we can have, and we're lucky to have a parent or some other person that's close to them that they can kind of give us their verbiage for them, right? And then we'll work on having the client develop it with us. So.
Yeah, I would just also add that when our assessors are working with students, depending on the severity of their where they are on the spectrum, sometimes it's important to remember that there's a time where you are going to have to maybe stop the assessment because they might just be guessing or repeating the last word, or they might be perseverating on a particular word or idea from the previous question. So obviously, there has to be a time where you would want to suspend, and then, as it's been already mentioned, you know, go and take the time to gather maybe the information from other sources and other people. Again, going back to the IEP, the present levels, take your time to read the present levels. You'd be surprised what the teachers are actually writing, and the providers are the service providers are writing in their present levels on the IEP. It's just a summation of their observations, so you can learn a lot from that as well.
Something I like to add as well is, like, I found that with the younger they are, is dealing with the family members, and especially with the Latino community and caregivers. It's like dealing with, as was already mentioned by Jeanette, you know, the denial, right? The denial of not seeing the limitations that they may have, as well as the guilt, right? It's like, there's something wrong, this is my fault, right? And then you have the issue of, and then with the couple, if the parents are together, right? It's like, now we have an issue. It's like, is one blaming the other, right? So being able to kind of help them then see that they need assistance. They may need to become now part of the treatment for couples therapy, or a part of, you know, because again, with some persons who are, I said, okay, I can see how my kid might need therapy, but I don't need therapy. Well, how about if I meet with you so I can find out more about your kid, right? So having the session, I know with the teenager that I dealt with, in terms of having the mom come in, and I spend part of my time with the mom separately, and then him, so that I can see what are her issues, what is she noticing, etc. And a lot of psychoeducation, right, with her, and then having the father come in very rarely because of their schedule. But it come in so they can, you know, it's a challenge to co-parent anyway, right? And now to have persons co-parent with something that they have no clue they would be dealing with, you know, when they had their children, especially if it's like, well, my other kid is, you know, that doesn't have any developmental delays. My other kid is, you know, normal, right? And that's a challenge to now learning something new, right? Learning how to engage and how to evaluate their other child or this child differently. So, and then recently I had a friend who hadn't talked to me for years. Well, he's actually a therapist, and he's calling me about his one child who's at Berkeley and doing great and all that. And he said, but then we saw about his son who has Asperger's and who had struggles and issues, but he knew he's an MFT, he knew about 504s and how the child had a struggle in one college, university, but he did go to another. And with the 504s, now his son is an architect, you know, and so being able to see it's like, you know, but he had the support of both parents, etc. And they used, you know, ADA, you know, and my comment to them is like, some people might, you know, maybe put off by him, but it's like, but I would really trust whatever, you know, architecture or that guy came up with, because you know how many times he double checked everything? He didn't double check, he probably 100 checked it, you know, to make sure it's all, you know, correct and safe and all that. So there are positives to having this, you know, perspective and view of the world and how things work and making sure that they work correctly. So let's see, next question someone might have. And put in the chat if you want. So we have this quote, right? With ignorance comes fear, from fear comes bigotry, education is the key to acceptance, right? So being able to become more educated on the special needs that some of our clients have, right? And it's, but I think really to acknowledge our own lack of knowledge, right? Ignorance, and our own fears, so that we don't compound it, you know, and see, but yet to be able to, you know, talk with other persons who might have experience in the area to see also there, because we also want to know they may need some other treatment or modalities that we're not available for, right? The ABA and things like that, that, you know, we're psychotherapists, we're not, you know, we're not ABA specialists. But again, to be able to advocate for that and to be able to see what's appropriate, what's not, what are like in our lane, what's our lane, what's not, okay? Provide that support. So if there aren't any more questions, I hope you guys take from this that you have, you know, various resources. You have Rosalinda, you have Jeanette, you have Brian, okay? As well as your supervisors. What's that? Telehealth resources. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what we're
just the
doing.
link that I had in the presentation, just to make it easier for people to copy and paste.
Okay. So, all right. I think with that, then thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you on the next training all together, and then your supervisors will see you in your little pods, right? Your therapy, and hopefully you guys can maybe bring this up in terms of maybe some questions that come to you after today or considerations, so you can talk about it in your group supervision. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Hey, Nahil. See that?